November 23rd, 1987. An unnatural silence blanketed a newly renovated home on Ransom Street in Holland, Michigan. Rick Brink, a dependable craftsman known throughout the community for his reliability, hadn't shown up for work at the Trenway furniture plant that morning. His boss felt an immediate knot of concern tightening in his stomach. Something wasn't right. Frantic calls to Rick's parents, Garrett and Ida, confirmed what everyone feared most. Something was terribly, terribly wrong with their son and his young wife. They drove to the property in tense silence, hearts pounding with dread. The sight of Rick's Chevrolet Blazer sitting in the driveway sparked a brief flicker of hope. Perhaps he'd simply overslept after a late night. Perhaps it was just a minor delay, a misunderstanding. But that fragile hope shattered in an instant. Inside the vehicle, Rick lay slumped over, his body showing signs of fatal violence. His head rested against the door in an unnatural position. The scene was beyond anyone's comprehension. When Ottawa County deputies entered the house itself, they discovered Gail, Rick's 22-year-old wife, in the primary bedroom. Someone had placed a pillow over her face in what appeared to be a grotesque final gesture. Beneath it, investigators found evidence of a brutal, calculated execution. The young couple, full of life and dreams just hours before, had been violently taken from this world in the darkness of night. The initial theory of a domestic incident gone wrong quickly collapsed when investigators made a crucial discovery. The weapon, believed to be a .22 caliber handgun, was completely missing from the scene. That single detail changed absolutely everything. It meant there had been a third person involved. Someone else had been there. Someone methodical and careful. Someone who left behind a brutal, nearly perfect crime scene that would haunt this small Michigan community for nearly 3 decades. Before we continue unraveling this shocking true story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for crime records. Your support helps us bring these important forgotten stories to light. Don't forget to give this video a like and leave a comment below telling us what you think. We read every single one. For 27 long years, this unsolved case haunted Ottawa County, Michigan. 2 precious lives extinguished far too soon. 2 devastated families desperately searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. The Brink deaths weren't just a local tragedy that faded with time. They represented the first domino in a series of shocking revelations that would eventually expose decades of dark secrets carefully hidden beneath the surface of what appeared to be a peaceful, trusting, small-town community. In 2013, a dedicated cold case unit finally identified a suspect after years of painstaking investigation. The truth, when it finally emerged, shocked everyone. It wasn't an unknown predator stalking the quiet streets at night. It wasn't some random drifter passing through town looking for victims. It was someone Gail had loved and trusted her entire life. Someone who was supposed to protect her from harm. Someone who had twisted that familial love into something absolutely monstrous and unthinkable. This case powerfully demonstrates the unwavering persistence of families who absolutely refused to give up hope. It showcases detectives who wouldn't allow files to gather dust in forgotten boxes in basement storage rooms. And it proves how modern investigative techniques combined with old-fashioned police work can finally give voice to victims who have been silenced for far too long. The community was fundamentally and permanently changed by what happened on Ransom Street. Fear swept through Ottawa County like a cold November wind blowing off Lake Michigan. Neighbors began eyeing neighbors with newfound suspicion and wariness. The hidden darkness that can exist beneath the peaceful veneer of small-town life was laid completely bare for all to see. Everything would crack wide open when the full, horrifying truth finally emerged 27 years after that terrible night. Here's perhaps the most disturbing fact in this entire case. The key suspect had actually been interviewed during the original investigation back in 1987, yet somehow managed to slip through the cracks in the system. For nearly 3 decades, this person attended community vigils honoring the victims. This person looked grieving parents directly in the eye at memorial services. This person concealed unimaginable secrets behind a carefully constructed mask of innocence and grief, hiding in plain sight for over a quarter of a century. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments section below. We're always fascinated to see how far these true crime stories travel and how they connect viewers from across the entire globe. Today we'll walk you through the tragic events of November 1987 in careful detail. We'll trace decades of frustrating, unanswered questions that tormented investigators and families alike. We'll examine the painstaking investigative work that continued even when hope seemed lost. And we'll reveal the crucial breakthrough that finally brought a twisted form of justice to Gail and Rick Brink after so many years of waiting. This is a true story of devastating loss that forever altered multiple families. It's a story of relentless persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds. It's a story of calculated deception maintained over decades. And ultimately, it's a story of justice that was severely delayed but never completely denied. Let's begin by traveling back to Ottawa County, Michigan in the fall of 1987. Ottawa County, Michigan in 1987 felt very much like the kind of place where everyone still knew their neighbors by name and reputation. With just over 200,000 people spread across charming towns like Holland, nestled right beside the beautiful shores of Lake Michigan, it was a close-knit community built fundamentally on trust and familiarity. People regularly left their doors unlocked at night, without a second thought. Children rode their bikes freely from early morning until the streetlights flickered on at dusk, and parents didn't worry constantly about their safety. It was genuinely the kind of area where families eagerly put down deep roots, carefully built their futures, and sincerely believed in the inherent safety and fundamental goodness of their tight-knit community. This was the world that Gail Weirden grew up in, surrounded by love despite limited financial resources. She was a remarkably driven young woman whose ambition and carefully crafted plans for the future stood out brilliantly even from a young age. Born in 1965, Gail came from a large, loving family. The Weirdens were long on love and affection, but often short on extra money for luxuries. The Weirden household was usually loud and chaotic, packed with 8 energetic children, filled with the kind of close-knit, boisterous energy that money simply couldn't buy or replicate. Despite the financial challenges, there was genuine warmth and connection. But Gail wanted something more from life than what she'd grown up with. From the time she was quite young, she would tell her older sister Cheryl with absolute conviction that she would work as hard as necessary to achieve the comfortable life she clearly envisioned for herself and her future family. Gail possessed natural ambition and drive that set her apart. She also had a genuinely special way with people that helped her get ahead in life and in her various jobs. As a teenage waitress working at local restaurants, she would flash her naturally warm, engaging smile, tell a quick joke that made customers laugh, and the tips would come rolling in consistently and generously. She was simply a naturally bright, charismatic person, someone who made any room feel noticeably more alive and energetic just by walking into it. Her physical appearance drew considerable attention from men, both positive attention and unfortunately some negative, unwanted attention as well. Fortunately for Gail, she had her older brother Ryan, often nearby during her teenage years. He was a solid, self-assured young man, 2.5 years older than Gail, who seemed to genuinely think that protecting his younger sister was his primary responsibility in life. Ryan and Cheryl together formed an informal but effective protective circle around their younger sister. They served as an early warning system against any potential trouble that might try to get too close to Gail. They watched over her carefully as she navigated her teenage years and early adulthood. Trouble did eventually arrive in Gail's life, first in the form of a serious romantic relationship with a man we'll refer to simply as L to protect privacy. Their relationship developed quickly, became quite intense, and eventually revealed itself to be a serious mistake that Gail would need to escape from. The couple had even started building a house together, actively planning what they believed would be a shared future. But the foundation of their relationship felt unstable and problematic from the very start. There were warning signs that those closest to Gail noticed with growing concern. Then, in 1984, everything changed for Gail in the best possible way. A dependable contractor named Rick Brink, 25 years old and widely known as reliable and hard-working as they come, walked into the restaurant where Gail was working as a waitress. The connection between them was immediate, powerful, and undeniable. Rick went home that very same day and told his mother with absolute certainty that he had just met the woman he was definitely going to marry. Gail felt exactly the same powerful connection. When she honestly compared Rick to Elle, she could clearly see everything that her current boyfriend fundamentally wasn't. The breakup with Elle proved difficult and eventually became genuinely concerning for Gail's safety. When Gail went to Elle's residence to collect her personal belongings, the situation turned aggressive and resulted in visible injuries to Gail that shocked her family members. Ryan heard about what had happened to his sister and immediately paid Elle a direct confrontational visit. The message was delivered clearly and forcefully, both verbally and physically. The abusive relationship was completely over, and Gail was moving forward with her life whether Elle accepted it or not. Gail and Rick started dating seriously, and to anyone observing them together, it was abundantly clear they were absolutely perfectly matched for each other. Rick was the stable, dependable, respectful partner that Gail genuinely needed and deserved. He treated her with consistent respect and active encouragement. They shared the same fundamental goals and values: hard work, building a loving family, and creating a warm home where they could grow old together in happiness. That summer, out on the beautiful expanse of Lake Michigan in Rick's boat, he patiently taught Gail how to water ski. Their genuine laughter carried across the sparkling water. They looked exactly like the picture-perfect young couple you see in old photographs that make you smile, believing wholeheartedly that a wonderful future was theirs to build together. They married on April 25th, 1986, the day immediately after Gail's 21st birthday. It was a small, intimate church ceremony attended by close family members and friends, followed by a joyful reception held by the lake, where they danced together as if their future was absolutely certain and secure. They honeymooned under sunny skies, enjoying their time as newlyweds. When they returned home to Michigan, they were genuinely ready and eager to tackle their biggest project yet as a married couple. Rick's father, Garrett, had found them what seemed like the ideal fixer-upper property. It was a foreclosed house sitting on a generous 20 acres of land on Ransom Street, located just outside the main area of Holland. The property was admittedly in quite rough shape after being abandoned, but Rick was a genuinely skilled craftsman, someone who professionally trained other carpenters in proper techniques. He could clearly envision the tremendous potential hidden in that neglected old house. He could see the beautiful future home concealed beneath years of accumulated neglect and damage. They moved into the property that October, two optimistic young people armed with big dreams and tremendous determination to succeed. They carefully documented everything on video camera, scrubbing away years of dirt, painting fresh colors on old walls, knocking down walls to create better layouts. It was their shared project, their shared life taking physical form with every day of hard work. The house was becoming their home. By November, approximately 18 months into their marriage, Gail was quietly, excitedly confiding in her sister Cheryl about their next big renovation project for the house, creating a proper nursery for the baby they were planning to have soon. The house on Ransom Street was finally ready for their carefully considered long-term plans to unfold exactly as they'd envisioned. Gail and Rick stood together at the threshold of everything they had worked so incredibly hard to achieve. Their future looked bright and promising. The night of Saturday, November 21st, 1987, was meant to be a joyful celebration for the young couple. A high school friend of Rick's was getting married, and Gail and Rick were among the invited guests at the wedding reception. They laughed together, danced enthusiastically, and thoroughly enjoyed the festive atmosphere. Rick had a couple of beers. Gail was feeling relaxed, happy, and genuinely enjoying herself. They left the celebration around 11 o'clock that night, driving home together to the house they were transforming with their own hands into their dream home. Their car's tail lights disappeared into the dark Michigan night as they headed down the quiet rural road. No one at that wedding reception could have possibly known it would be the last time anyone would see Gail and Rick Brink alive. The unusual, unsettling quiet emanating from the house on Ransom Street continued uninterrupted into Monday morning, November 23rd. Rick Brink's direct supervisor at the Trenway furniture plant, a man named Jim Carlson, immediately noticed Rick's conspicuously empty workstation when he arrived that morning. Rick was exceptionally dependable and reliable, the kind of valued employee who never simply missed work without providing explanation or calling ahead. Jim called the Brink house repeatedly throughout the morning, but the phone just rang endlessly with no answer. An increasingly uncomfortable feeling began settling heavily in the pit of his stomach. He decided to contact Rick's parents, Garrett and Ida Brink, to see if they had heard from their son. The concerning news hit Garrett and Ida with devastating force. Rick missing work was completely out of character and deeply worrying. A quick follow-up call to Gail's office at Donald Automotive confirmed she hadn't shown up for work either, which was equally unusual. The young couple, both well known throughout the community for their exceptional work ethic and reliability, had simply vanished into the cold Michigan autumn without any explanation. Jim Carlson made the decision to drive out to the Ransom Street property, bringing Rick's increasingly terrified parents along with him. The first thing they noticed upon arrival offered a brief glimmer of hope. Rick's Chevrolet Blazer was parked in the driveway exactly where it should be. Perhaps they were both ill with the flu. Perhaps they had finally allowed themselves to sleep in late after a fun night out. But that fleeting hope died immediately the moment they approached the vehicle more closely and looked inside. Rick was slumped inside the Blazer in an obviously unnatural position. The 28-year-old was positioned awkwardly on the driver's side, his knees pressed uncomfortably against the floorboards, his upper body leaning at a strange angle toward the passenger seat. His head rested against the door, and there were unmistakable dark stains indicating fatal violence. The sight was absolutely horrific and incomprehensible. Garrett and Ida didn't need to go inside the house itself to understand with terrible certainty that something absolutely horrific had occurred to their beloved son and daughter-in-law. Their dreams for this wonderful young couple were completely shattered. In that single terrible moment of discovery, they immediately backed away from the vehicle and called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department to report what they'd found. The first deputies arriving on the scene, including experienced Detective Mark Jenkins, felt the oppressive, heavy weight of silence as they carefully entered the property and began their preliminary investigation. Jenkins, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years of solid experience on the force, had witnessed plenty of disturbing crime scenes throughout his lengthy career. But the quiet, methodical, calculated nature of this particular scene was especially unsettling to him and the other responding officers. They discovered Gail's body in the primary bedroom of the house. Someone had deliberately placed a pillow over her face. When an officer carefully lifted it away, they saw the devastating evidence beneath of extreme violence. Gail had been attacked at extremely close range in what appeared to be a calculated execution rather than a crime of sudden passion. Initially, the grim thought among the first responders and investigators was that this might tragically be a domestic incident that had spiraled completely out of control. It was a sadly common, if absolutely heartbreaking, explanation for such violence between married couples. The initial theory was that Rick might have harmed his wife during some kind of argument or rage before taking his own life in remorse. But that working theory fell apart completely and immediately when they conducted a thorough search of Rick's blazer and the surrounding area. The weapon, believed to be a .22 caliber handgun based on the nature of the injuries, was nowhere to be found anywhere on the property. That single missing detail changed absolutely everything about how investigators understood this crime scene. It meant definitively that there had been a third person actively involved in these deaths. The actual perpetrator had walked calmly away from the scene, deliberately taking the weapon with them and leaving behind a meticulously arranged, brutal crime scene. Rick had been shot twice in the left side of his head at close range. There was clear damage to the passenger window of the vehicle, and investigators noted that the driver's side window was partially lowered, which was significant. To Detective Jenkins, this specific detail strongly suggested that Rick had voluntarily rolled down his window to speak with someone who had approached the vehicle. More importantly, it suggested this was someone Rick recognized and knew personally. Someone he didn't perceive as any kind of threat whatsoever in those final moments before his life was violently taken from him. The house itself offered frustratingly few useful clues to investigators despite their thorough examination. There were absolutely no signs of any physical struggle anywhere inside. There was no evidence whatsoever of forced entry through doors or air windows. This clearly wasn't a robbery or burglary gone wrong. Cash lay in plain sight on the kitchen counter beside the couple's wallets, completely untouched. Gail's jewelry collection sat entirely undisturbed in the bedroom. 2 watches remained exactly where she'd left them on her dresser. Both victims were still wearing their wedding rings on their fingers. The only item in the entire house that seemed even slightly out of normal place was a small pile of clothing on the bedroom floor, as if someone had simply tossed it there casually before climbing into bed for the night. The perpetrator had been extraordinarily careful and methodical. No shell casings were recovered anywhere at the scene. The only projectiles present were still lodged in the victims' bodies. The killer had systematically collected all the spent casings, carefully wiped surfaces clean of fingerprints, and vanished into the night, leaving behind almost no physical evidence for forensic analysis. The crime scene was disturbingly sterile and clean. No useful footprints could be identified or lifted. No clear handprints were found on any surfaces. No stray hairs or clothing fibers offered any investigative leads whatsoever. Detectives managed to successfully lift exactly 6 fingerprints total from various surfaces throughout the house. 4 of them were quickly identified as belonging to Rick and Gail themselves. The remaining 2 prints, one lifted carefully from the toilet and one from the telephone, didn't match anyone currently in existing police databases, which was deeply frustrating. The estimated time of the tragic incident was determined to be the early hours of Sunday, November 22nd, shortly after the couple had left the wedding celebration and returned home. Gail's brother Ryan later confirmed this timeline to investigators, mentioning that he had tried calling his sister on Sunday to chat and received no answer whatsoever. Just that empty, haunting silence of a phone, ringing endlessly in what turned out to be an empty house. Holland, Michigan, a town previously known throughout the region for its remarkably low crime rate and safe streets, suddenly felt very different to its residents. People throughout the community started locking their doors for the first time in years, even during daytime hours. Mrs. Gable, who operated the popular flower shop on River Avenue, told a local reporter with obvious concern, "You never imagined something like this could possibly happen here in our town. Now everyone's constantly looking over their shoulder everywhere they go." Parents throughout Holland began keeping their children much closer to home, a new wariness clearly visible in their eyes. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air throughout the entire shocked community. Was the person responsible for this violence someone they encountered and interacted with every single day? The crime scene at the Brink home offered frustratingly few concrete answers to the dedicated investigators working the case. With almost no physical evidence to properly analyze or follow up on, the investigation necessarily had to shift direction entirely. Officers began the slow, methodical, exhausting work of systematically canvassing the entire community. They interviewed friends, family members, work colleagues, and casual acquaintances. They were desperately hoping for some crack to appear in the young couple's seemingly perfect lives that might point toward a suspect. Family members were naturally among the very first people spoken to during the initial investigation. Gail's older sister, Cheryl Weirden, shared her overwhelming grief with investigators in emotional interviews. She also shared a specific concern from Gail's past that seemed potentially relevant. She brought up Elle, Gail's former boyfriend, and carefully recounted the disturbing end of that troubled relationship. There had been visible injuries to Gail. There had been a violent incident. Gail's. Brother Ryan had even confronted Elle physically and forcefully over his unacceptable treatment of Gail. Many people close to the situation genuinely believed that Elle had never truly moved past losing Gail to another man. The jealousy and resentment might have festered and grown dangerously over time as he watched her build a genuinely happy life with Rick. It represented a classic motive for violence, one rooted in rejected romantic feelings and dangerous obsession. Investigators quickly located Elle and brought him in for formal questioning. He cooperated fully with the investigation from the beginning. He firmly denied any involvement whatsoever in the tragic events. He voluntarily agreed to take a polygraph examination to prove his innocence. The test results came back indicating he was being completely truthful in his denials. The most promising early lead in the investigation had completely evaporated into nothing. Investigators found themselves essentially back at square one with no clear direction forward. The brutal double homicide continued to absolutely dominate conversation throughout Holland and surrounding communities. A palpable sense of fear settled over the entire area, like a heavy, oppressive fog that wouldn't lift. Local newspapers ran daily updates on the investigation's progress, or lack thereof. Frank Miller, the experienced editor of the Holland Sentinel, noted a drastic, noticeable change in the town's overall morale and atmosphere. People here are accustomed to quiet, peaceful lives where everyone knows everyone, Miller told a colleague. Now every rumor feels like a genuine threat to safety. This case has fundamentally changed how everyone views their neighbors and community. Neighborhood watch groups formed practically overnight throughout Holland. Children, once given considerable freedom to roam and play, were now kept under much stricter supervision by increasingly worried parents. Several days later, a surprising tip led investigators in an entirely new and unexpected direction. A man known locally by the nickname Shotgun Sid walked voluntarily into the police precinct. He was the previous owner of the Ransom Street house before it was foreclosed. Sid was a notorious figure in the area, someone with known connections to motorcycle gang activity. His sphere of influence reportedly reached from Detroit's roughest streets all the way to Holland's quieter corners. Sid admitted openly to past involvement in various questionable activities. However, he claimed to maintain a firm personal boundary against violence involving completely innocent people. He had reportedly become a federal informant, providing information to authorities. Sid presented investigators with a chilling alternative theory about what might have happened. He believed strongly that the perpetrators had actually been looking for him specifically. They simply didn't know the house had changed ownership. Gail and Rick, in his honest assessment, were tragic victims of mistaken identity. They had been caught up in dangerous business they knew absolutely nothing about. Investigators pursued this lead with considerable energy and resources. They dove deep into the complex underworld of Detroit motorcycle gang activity. They chased shadows and followed tenuous leads for weeks. Officers interviewed numerous known associates. They spoke extensively with various informants operating in the city. Sid also made his own personal inquiries, tapping into his extensive network for any useful information. He tried desperately to discover who might have wanted him eliminated badly enough to send people to his former house. But the trail went completely cold despite everyone's best efforts. The rumors led absolutely nowhere concrete. No solid evidence emerged connecting anything to gang-related activity. Nothing could definitively tie the Brink murders to that dangerous world. Eventually, even Sid himself began to seriously doubt his own theory. The investigation hit yet another significant dead end that frustrated everyone involved. Then, on Christmas Eve, another absolutely horrific discovery sent powerful shockwaves through the already traumatized community. Deborah Wilson, aged 30, was reported missing by her deeply concerned husband. He had returned home from a holiday party to find the lights blazing throughout their house. The sliding door leading to their backyard field was standing wide open, which was very unusual. His father searched the dark field and made the terrible discovery of Deborah's body lying in the cold. She had been brutally attacked. The violence was extreme and disturbingly personal in nature. The geographical proximity of this new case was deeply alarming to investigators and residents alike. Deborah Wilson's house was located only half a mile from the Brink home on Ransom Street. She had attended the same high school as Rick years earlier. They were the same age. The connections seemed far too significant to simply dismiss as mere coincidence. Investigators felt a cold sense of dread settling over them. Was there now a serial offender operating in their small corner of Holland? The speculation ignited a new, even more terrifying theory throughout the frightened community. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Department began carefully revisiting older unsolved cases in their files. The file of a 10-year-old case rose from the archives. The 1977 case of 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky. She had been attacked multiple times in her own bedroom. Her home was located less than a mile away from the Brink residence. 3 separate tragic incidents, 2 victims sharing the same first name, all occurring within a very tight geographical radius, all remaining tragically unsolved despite investigative efforts. The fear gripping Holland intensified dramatically. Residents who had once routinely left their doors unlocked now secured them multiple times each evening. Fear was no longer some distant, abstract threat. It became a constant, palpable presence in daily life for everyone. Parents kept their children under constant watchful eyes at all times. Many members of the community began viewing every neighbor with underlying suspicion. They couldn't help wondering if something monstrous was walking among them, hiding in plain sight. But criminal investigations must rely fundamentally on concrete evidence. They cannot sustain themselves indefinitely on fear or speculation alone. Despite the tantalizing geographical connections and grim similarities between the cases, investigators couldn't find any tangible thread definitively connecting them. There was no matching pattern of behavior or methodology, no credible witnesses placing the same person at multiple scenes, no forensic evidence linking the 3 separate investigations together. Each case stood frustratingly isolated from the others. One by one, the files on Deborah Wilson, Deborah Polinsky, and the Brink double homicide were officially closed as active investigations. They were consigned to cardboard boxes in the records room, joining other unsolved cases. All viable leads had been thoroughly exhausted. The hope that had once burned so intensely in the hearts of the grieving families began to slowly dim. It gradually faded into a grim, painful acceptance of an unsolved mystery. For the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, the unsolved Brink case became a heavy, persistent burden. It served as a constant reminder of investigative failure. Sheriff Thomas Riley, a dedicated man who took considerable pride in solving local crimes, felt the weight of this pressure deeply every single day. He understood completely the public's mounting frustration. He met regularly with members of the Brink and Weirden families. He offered sincere condolences. He repeatedly assured them of the department's ongoing commitment to finding answers. But without any new evidence emerging, his words felt increasingly hollow, even to himself. The case effectively went dormant. It joined the growing collection of cold case files stored in the county archives, gathering dust. Years passed slowly. The community gradually adapted to its new, uneasy reality. The Brink case became a hushed story passed down through generations, a local tragedy that people spoke about in lowered voices. Children growing up in the area heard whispered tales about the young couple who had vanished into the Michigan night all those years ago. For Gail and Rick's families, however, the wound remained perpetually open and raw. Garrett and Ida Brink found very little solace as time passed. Gail's sister Cheryl spoke frequently of Gail, working tirelessly to keep her memory alive in the community. The families absolutely refused to let the case be forgotten completely. They organized small memorial gatherings each year. They spoke willingly to any reporter who would still listen to their story. They remained a persistent, grieving voice crying out for answers throughout the long decades. By the early 2000s, Holland had evolved into a noticeably different place. The original investigators had long since retired from active duty. Some had passed away, but new technologies were emerging, offering new possibilities for solving old crimes. In 2009, a specialized new unit formed within the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. Its purpose was singular and focused: to systematically reopen long-dormant cases and apply fresh investigative techniques. The cold case unit was officially established. 2 experienced detectives were specifically assigned to lead this new unit. Detective Dave Blakely and Detective Venus Repper both came from downstate areas. They were relative outsiders to the Holland community. Critically, they were unburdened by old loyalties or decades-old relationships. They carried no preconceived notions about any of the cases. They brought completely fresh perspectives to investigations that had been steeped in pain and frustration for years. Detective Repper often spoke publicly about the unique advantage that time could provide in cold case investigations. Loyalties change over the years, she would explain to reporters. Friendships evolve and sometimes end. People who were hiding secrets 20 or 30 years ago often no longer feel the same need to keep them buried. Sometimes they've carried that secret for so long that they genuinely want to unburden themselves. The cold case unit began its important work methodically and systematically. They started by focusing on the 2 Deborah cases, the unsolved incidents from 1977 and 1987. Both cases had that unsettling geographical proximity to the Brink homicide that had troubled earlier investigators. The team painstakingly reviewed every single page of the original investigative files. They re-examined old evidence using modern forensic techniques. They were searching for patterns, looking for previously overlooked connections. Progress came in one of these older cases. A suspect in the Deborah Wilson case eventually passed away. His death came accompanied by a confession that finally provided answers. This breakthrough allowed the Wilson file to be officially closed after decades. Then a crucial development occurred in the Deborah Polinsky case as well. A new confession emerged from an unexpected source. It led directly to the closure of that 20-year-old mystery. With these 2 historically connected cases finally resolved, the unit's focus inevitably and naturally shifted. Their next major undertaking would be tackling the Brink double homicide. It remained the county's most notorious and emotionally charged unsolved case. The cold case detectives began the tedious but absolutely essential foundational work. They meticulously scoured every single page of the original Brink investigation files. Witness statements were carefully reread with fresh eyes. Alibis were methodically rechecked and verified. Every forgotten note, every seemingly minor detail was laid out under the harsh fluorescent lights of the investigation room. They were specifically looking for previously overlooked details. They searched intensely for subtle inconsistencies in statements. They sought any potential crack in what had appeared to be the perfect facade of the Brinks' lives. And then they found it. A hairline fracture appeared in a long-accepted alibi. Gail's older brother, Ryan Weirden, had been considered an early person of interest during the original investigation. He had provided a specific alibi, claiming to have been with his then-girlfriend Pam throughout the entire night in question. Pam, who was now his wife, had corroborated this story back in 1987. Their account had been quite detailed. It involved an unsuccessful trip to the laundromat, then visiting a friend named Rose's house to complete the laundry, and finally returning home together for the evening. But buried deep within the original investigative files was a troubling detail that somehow hadn't received proper attention. It involved a polygraph examination that Pam had taken. When specifically asked if she had been with Ryan for the entire night, Pam's response had indicated otherwise. This single discrepancy, somehow overlooked or dismissed for decades, now stood out with sharp clarity. It represented the first genuine crack in what had seemed like an impenetrable wall of silence. Make sure you're subscribed to Crime Records so you don't miss how this incredible case unfolds. Hit that like button and leave a comment telling us your thoughts so far. In 2011, cold case investigators made the decision to revisit Ryan and Pam Weirden. They were now a family of 6. They had been married for 23 years. Their entire lives had been built upon the foundation of events from that long ago night. Ryan, now working as a stay-at-home parent, was the initial point of contact. His recollection of events from over 2 decades earlier was predictably somewhat foggy. This was certainly a common and understandable response when discussing such a distant past. But the investigators' focus was steadily shifting. Their attention turned more directly toward his wife, Pam. They arranged for her to come to the station for a formal interview. Ryan accompanied Pam to the police station, serving as a silent shadow of support. He even requested permission to sit in on her interview. Investigators firmly and immediately denied this request. They needed to speak with Pam independently. Pam's official statement was essentially a carbon copy of her husband's account. She repeated the same story about the laundromat trip. She described the same quiet evening at home. No new information was offered. No clarity emerged regarding that nagging discrepancy from the original investigation regarding their alibi. For the investigators conducting this interview, it appeared to be another frustrating dead end. However, their professional instincts were telling them something different. They remained certain that this couple represented a locked box containing crucial information. They just needed to find the right key. They began digging deeper into who Ryan and Pam had actually been back in 1987. That's when they uncovered a crucial detail about Ryan's personal life. Ryan had actually been involved romantically with 2 different women simultaneously during that time period. Pam was the newer relationship. The other woman was named Crystal Ban, who went by Chris. Their breakup had reportedly been amicable. They had maintained a friendship afterward. Detectives successfully tracked Chris down and brought her in for an interview. The conversation was winding down, appearing to yield nothing particularly new or useful. Detectives Blakely and Repper were actually on their feet, preparing to leave and conclude the interview. Then Chris suddenly stopped them. "Well, actually," she said carefully, "there might be something else you should know." The detectives slowly sat back down in their chairs. What Chris revealed in the following moments would completely reframe the entire investigation. Chris recounted how during the week immediately following the tragic events, Ryan had expressed a desire to drive past the house on Ransom Street. She had refused outright. The very idea of visiting that location gave her what she described as serious discomfort. Instead of going to the house, they went to a nearby park. There, sitting under the indifferent trees, Ryan made a shocking confession to her. He revealed that he and his sister Gail had engaged in inappropriate relations. He claimed it had started when she was 9 years old and he was 12. He insisted it had been consensual in nature until the final time, when Gail had clearly said no and he had forced himself upon her. To the experienced detectives listening to this account, the notion of any legitimate consent was absolutely grotesque and legally impossible. A 9-year-old child simply cannot consent to such things under any circumstances. Gail had been her brother's victim long before she became someone else's victim. The disturbing revelations deepened considerably. Chris went on to reveal that during that same conversation in the park, Ryan had shown her a photograph from a boat outing with Gail and Rick. It was an image of Gail wearing a bathing suit. "Look how attractive she is," Ryan had said, openly admiring his own sister in an entirely inappropriate manner. Chris told the detectives that Ryan had admitted staring at Gail in an obviously inappropriate way throughout that entire day on the boat. Rick had apparently noticed this disturbing, predatory gaze that was fixed upon his wife. For Detectives Blakely and Repper, the puzzle pieces were suddenly slamming into place with terrible clarity. The supposedly protective older brother was actually something monstrous. Here was a clear motive, a twisted, disturbing fixation and the rage of someone whose victim had successfully escaped his control. But a witness statement about a decades-old confession, however disturbing, wasn't sufficient evidence for a criminal conviction. They needed substantially more. They turned their attention back to other family members, and the picture that emerged grew increasingly darker. Ryan's older sister Cheryl revealed that she and Ryan had been estranged for several years following a bitter family argument over their parents' veterans' benefits. But immediately after Ryan's recent unproductive interview with police, he had unexpectedly called Cheryl completely out of the blue. "Life's too short," he had told her with apparent sincerity. "Blood is thicker than water." He expressed a desire to reconcile their relationship. The timing seemed far too convenient to be coincidental. It felt very much like someone strategically shoring up his defenses, securing family loyalty before things became more difficult. The detectives then made a crucial decision. When they sat down with Cheryl and carefully laid out the disturbing truth they had learned from Chris, the childhood abuse, the inappropriate fixation, she was rendered completely speechless. The shock hit her like a physical blow, leaving her feeling genuinely sick. She realized with terrible clarity that Gail had most likely never confided in her about any of this precisely because Gail knew Cheryl would have confronted Ryan immediately and forcefully. The past began rearranging itself in Cheryl's mind, revealing a much darker pattern she had never recognized before. She recalled Ryan's genuinely bizarre behavior at the funeral service. He had described details of the scene with chilling, vivid clarity, narrating it as if someone were walking down the hallway and discovering Gail. It was as if he were describing either a vivid dream or an actual memory he possessed. Then Ryan had voiced something truly unthinkable at the funeral. "You know," he had said to family members, "sometimes I wonder if I could have done something like this." At the time, Cheryl had dismissed these statements as the confused ramblings of a grief-stricken brother struggling to process an unimaginable loss. Now those words sounded like something entirely different and far more sinister. The portrait of Ryan that gradually emerged from interviews with other friends and family members was that of a deeply disturbed individual. He had reportedly offered to sell Gail's waterbed, the very bed where she had been found, to a family friend at a significantly reduced price. He had gone through her personal mail after her passing, reportedly finding and burning letters from other men in what appeared to be a final act of controlling possession. Another sister, Lynn, confirmed that Ryan had confessed to her that he wished he could apologize to Gail because he felt he had violated her. This was a sentiment he had allegedly repeated to one of his nieces as well. Even Ryan's stepson had not been spared from inappropriate conversations. Ryan had allegedly spoken to him about his feelings regarding Gail, reportedly admitting that sometimes she would say no, so he would force her. Then there was testimony from his Aunt Nava that proved particularly significant. She revealed that on the very day of the tragic events, both Gail and Ryan had separately called her to complain about each other. Gail had been angry that Ryan owed her money for a vehicle she had co-signed for. Ryan had been noticeably fuming that Gail, with her new house situated on 20 acres, apparently thought she was superior to the rest of the family. Their parents, who were living in a recreational vehicle at the time, had been forced to move it from Ryan's apartment complex parking lot due to regulations. Ryan had asked if they could temporarily park the vehicle on Gail and Rick's substantial property. Gail had declined this request. She didn't want to assume the liability, especially with younger siblings around during the ongoing renovation work. At the funeral service, Ryan had told Nava with cold, absolute certainty that if Gail and Rick had simply allowed their parents to park on the land, they would both still be alive today. Then he had turned directly to Nava and asked her the exact same question he had posed to Cheryl. "Do you think I would actually be capable of doing something like this?" The evidence remained entirely circumstantial in nature, essentially a mountain of deeply disturbing behavior and self-incriminating statements. But it was sufficient for Detectives Blakely and Repper. They were now absolutely certain that Ryan was their perpetrator. What they desperately needed now was a definitive crack in his carefully constructed foundation. That meant getting through to his wife, Pam. They brought both Ryan and Pam in for another formal round of interviews, questioning them separately. Ryan was notably abrasive and controlling throughout, repeatedly demanding to sit in on Pam's interview session. Pam, in stark contrast, appeared meek and mild-mannered, presenting as a woman who seemed to have spent a lifetime living under someone else's complete control. Her interview lasted a full 3 hours. It was a slow, painstaking process focused on gradually gaining her trust and making her feel safe enough to speak truthfully. Finally, after hours of careful conversation, she broke down. The alibi they had maintained for decades was completely fabricated. They had actually been home from the laundromat by 8 o'clock in the evening. Ryan had left shortly after that. He had returned later to spend time with her, then left again. He didn't return until 9 o'clock the following morning. Pam claimed she had absolutely no idea where Ryan had gone during those missing hours. She had simply assumed he was out conducting business to make ends meet financially. The reason for maintaining the false alibi was devastatingly simple. Ryan had insisted upon it absolutely. For over 2 decades, he had drilled this fabricated story into her repeatedly, demanding that she not only repeat it when asked, but actually believe it herself, in her own mind. He had reminded her very specifically of this story, just before this current interview. Though Pam admitted under pressure that the alibi was completely fabricated, she offered nothing more substantial during this session. The detectives remained absolutely convinced she was still holding back crucial information. They believed she remained trapped firmly in the psychological grip of a deeply manipulative person who controlled virtually every aspect of her life. By the end of those 3 exhausting hours, Ryan's patience had completely shattered. He began banging loudly and persistently on the interview room window, loudly, demanding that investigators immediately release his wife. The performance was genuinely unhinged and disturbing to witness. They allowed Pam to leave and immediately brought Ryan into an interview room. They confronted him directly and without hesitation. They informed him that Pam had recanted the long-standing alibi. Ryan denied everything completely. He claimed the detectives were outright lying to manipulate him. He suggested that Pam herself was lying for reasons he claimed he couldn't possibly understand. Then the investigators went directly for the most sensitive issue. They asked Ryan directly about his relationship with his sister. "What do you mean by that?" Ryan stalled, clearly buying time. Detective Blakely fixed him with a cold, unwavering stare. "You know exactly what I mean." After a long, uncomfortable silence filled the small room, Ryan offered a single, damningly inadequate phrase in response. "We were just 2 kids exploring," he said dismissively. "It was like playing doctor or nurse." He refused to say anything more on the subject. The interview room door clicked shut firmly, and Ryan Weirden walked out, leaving behind only the disturbing echo of his grossly inadequate excuse. In the days immediately following that tense interview, Ryan's carefully constructed facade of control crumbled completely. He left over 30 rambling voicemails on Detective Blakely's phone. The messages wildly oscillated between pure venom and a twisted form of appreciation. He called the detectives highly offensive names, but also referred to them as a necessary evil. He accused them of bullying his wife into recanting the alibi they'd maintained for decades. He vehemently denied any knowledge whatsoever of what happened to his sister, while simultaneously begging them to stop digging up what he termed childhood indiscretions. The man was clearly coming apart psychologically. He was like a pressure cooker ready to explode at any moment. Detectives Blakely and Repper knew with absolute certainty that Ryan needed to be taken off the streets as soon as possible. But they needed one final, absolutely solid piece of evidence to ensure a successful prosecution. In January of 2013, they went directly to Pam's workplace, intercepting her without Ryan's suffocating presence anywhere nearby. Their message to her was simple, direct, and honest. They explained that they were cold case detectives. This investigation was their sole focus. They were absolutely not going away. They needed resolution for Gail, for Rick, and for the families who had waited more than a quarter century for answers and justice. Something in their quiet but unwavering determination finally broke through Pam's wall of fear. She agreed to come to the station for another interview. This would prove to be the breakthrough interview that changed everything. Seated across the table from the two detectives, Pam began by clearly stating for the official record that she was not being threatened or coerced in any way whatsoever. She was present entirely of her own free will. And then she unburdened herself of a 25-year-old nightmare that had haunted her every single day. She confirmed the trip to the laundromat, the return home by 8 o'clock in the evening, and Ryan's subsequent disappearance. But what she revealed next was absolutely chilling. Ryan had returned the following morning at 9 o'clock, not with a quiet, normal entrance, but with frantic, desperate banging on her door. When she opened it, she found him visibly crying and emotionally distraught. He immediately blurted out a confession that would bind her to him for the next 25 years of her life. Ryan told Pam he had ended Gail and Rick's lives. Complete shock rendered Pam temporarily unable to speak or react. Ryan proceeded to explain what had happened. He told her he had gone to their house intending to argue about ongoing family tensions, the recreational vehicle, parking situation, the money he owed for the car Gail had co-signed for. The argument had escalated quickly and grown heated. Rick had finally ordered Ryan to leave the property and never return. Ryan left as instructed, but he returned approximately 20 minutes later with a fabricated excuse. His car wouldn't start. He needed jumper cables for the battery. Rick, ever helpful and trusting, went out to his Blazer to retrieve the necessary cables. Ryan approached the vehicle and gestured for Rick to roll down his window. When Rick complied, completely trusting his wife's brother, Ryan raised a .22 caliber revolver. He fired twice into the left side of Rick's head at point-blank range. Then Ryan walked calmly into the house. He proceeded to the primary bedroom where Gail was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of what had just occurred outside. He attacked her multiple times at extremely close range. Ryan's stated motive was as petty as it was absolutely monstrous. According to his own words, Gail thought she was superior to her own family. Pam, absolutely reeling from this horrific confession, told Ryan he needed to leave immediately. He did leave, but that very same afternoon he called her, desperately pleading to see her in person. Reluctantly and fearfully, she agreed to meet him. He picked her up along with her 6-month-old infant son, but instead of driving to his apartment as expected, he drove directly to the house on Ransom Street. He physically forced Pam from the vehicle, gripping her wrist painfully, and dragged her toward Rick's Blazer. He made her look directly at Rick's body, still slumped inside the vehicle. Then he pulled her forcibly into the house itself, directly to the bedroom, and forced her to look upon Gail's body. "Isn't she so beautiful?" he asked, a grotesque and deeply disturbing question to pose. Then came the direct, chilling threat that would control Pam's life for the next quarter-century. "If you tell anyone about this, I'll do exactly the same thing to you." He drove her back to his apartment where his friends stopped by for their usual coffee. Pam sat there completely frozen in terror as Ryan casually recounted how his sister and her husband had been harmed. This conversation occurred a full day before their bodies would be officially discovered, and 30 hours before Ryan would be formally notified by authorities. After his friend departed, as Pam asked to be taken home, Ryan showed her the actual weapon he had used. He also showed her a bag containing the clothes he had worn, explaining he was storing them in his vehicle to dispose of properly later. During the drive back to her home, he threatened her once more with absolute seriousness. He then meticulously constructed the false laundromat alibi that she would be forced to repeat for the next 25 years of her life. Pam had carried this absolutely horrific secret ever since that terrible day. She had attended the funeral, service. She had mourned alongside the family, all while living in constant terror. She was another of Ryan's victims, trapped not only by fear for her own life, but by fear for the safety of her infant son. Ryan was a master of psychological manipulation. His control over her had been absolutely complete. Even after her second interview with police, when she had only recanted the alibi without revealing the full truth, Ryan had raged at her furiously. He called her a traitor before quickly shifting tactics to gaslight her psychologically. But now, in this final cathartic interview, as she revealed the entire horrifying truth at last, Ryan's attempts at control manifested in a frantic digital barrage. His calls and text messages bombarded her phone relentlessly. Over 100 desperate attempts to reach her occurred during the hours of her interrogation. To the experienced detectives, this behavior was far more than simple harassment. It represented a clear and present danger to Pam's safety. They had absolutely no intention of sending Pam back into that dangerous environment. They also couldn't risk giving Ryan any opportunity to flee. The time for patience was over. They moved to arrest Ryan immediately. He was brought into custody, formally interrogated, and exactly as expected, denied absolutely everything. From his jail cell, Ryan's manipulation tactics continued relentlessly. He sent Pam 29 separate letters over time, conducting a desperate written campaign designed to make her recant her statement. But Pam had finally broken free from his control. The truth was out. Justice could finally move forward. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Crime Records for more true crime documentaries. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think about this case. Ryan Weirden's trial commenced in March of 2014. The Ottawa County Courthouse experienced an unprecedented influx of media representatives and spectators. District C Attorney Laura Mitchell led the prosecution efforts. She worked closely with Assistant District Attorney Jacob Flynn. Together they argued a compelling three-part motive that explained Ryan's actions. The prosecution presented testimony from 60 different witnesses throughout the trial. Pam Weirden served as the star witness. Her testimony was delivered quietly, but proved absolutely devastating in its impact. As Pam spoke, her voice remaining steady, Ryan's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. He suddenly rose from his seat in the courtroom. He began yelling. Deputies had to physically restrain and remove him. District Attorney Mitchell addressed the jury directly following Pam's powerful testimony. "Pamela Weirden has lived with a monster for 25 years," Mitchell stated clearly. "She has bravely unburdened herself of this terrible secret. Now this court must unburden her and the precious memory of Gail and Rick from his grasp forever." When Ryan himself took the witness stand in his own defense, his testimony proved rambling and difficult to follow. Under cross-examination, he broke down into tears. He portrayed himself as the innocent victim of an elaborate conspiracy. The defense scrambled desperately to create reasonable doubt. On March 28, 2014, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom was absolutely packed. Every available seat was occupied. Heavy silence fell over the room as everyone waited. The jury foreman stood and announced clearly, "Guilty on both counts." A collective gasp moved through the gallery. Quiet sobs could be heard from members of Gail and Rick's families. Cheryl Weirden clutched Rick's brother David tightly. Tears streamed down her face after waiting 27 years for this moment. At the sentencing hearing held the following month, Ryan Weirden took control of the podium. He launched into a furious, rambling statement that lasted over an hour. Rick's brother, David, then approached the podium to speak. His voice was heavy with decades of accumulated grief. Judge Margaret Hensley imposed the only sentence that appropriately fit the severity of the crimes. She sentenced Ryan to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, with absolutely no possibility of parole ever. In the years that followed his conviction, Ryan appealed his case 3 separate times. Every single appeal was firmly denied. For the families who had waited so long, the lengthy ordeal had finally reached its legal conclusion. Gail's sister Cheryl stated simply, "We're done. We finally got him." The Ottawa County of the 2000s was dramatically different from the trusting community of 1987. The case became a somber but important lesson about hidden dangers within seemingly safe communities. For Gail and Rick Brink, their dreams were tragically stolen, but their story finally had definitive answers. The truth, buried for 27 long years, had finally been brought into the light. Justice, however significantly delayed, had finally been found. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Crime Records. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. Give this video a like if you appreciate the work we do, bringing these important cases to light. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Stay safe out there and take care of your loved ones.